Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Unsaid Hours. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and slowly fall asleep. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's begin. This story belongs to a nurse named David. He has been working night shifts in a large teaching hospital for 16 years. He is the kind of nurse that patients remember, the kind who moves through a ward with a quiet efficiency that is also somehow warm, who explains what he is doing before he does it, who remembers the small details patients mention in passing and asks about them later. He chose night shifts because he is a night person, because the work is more intimate at night, because the ratio of nurses to patients is different and the attention you can give each person is deeper. He has seen a lot in 16 years, births and deaths and everything in between. He has sat with people in their last hours, and he has been the first person to see someone take their first breath of life outside the womb. He has held hands, and he has delivered bad news, and he has been the steady presence in the room when the family could not be there and someone needed to be. He does not easily unsettle. The patient in bed 4 of the oncology ward unsettled him. Her name was Mrs. Okonkwo. She was 67 years old, and she had been fighting her illness for 3 years, and she was losing, which she knew with the clear-eyed directness of someone who had made their peace with the situation and was now primarily concerned with being present for the time that remained. She was a retired professor of literature. She was funny in a dry and unexpected way. She read constantly, always had a book face down on the blanket beside her, and she had opinions about what she was reading that she expressed without being asked and without apology. David liked her. He liked her in the specific way you like patients who bring themselves fully to their situation rather than retreating from it, who engage with the people around them rather than turning inward, who make the people caring for them feel seen rather than functional. She started telling him about the visitors in the 3rd week of her stay. She mentioned it casually, the way you mention something you assume the other person already knows about. She said it while he was checking her vitals, not looking at him, looking at the wall across from her bed, in the tone of someone making an observation about the weather. She said that she appreciated that the hospital allowed family visits at night. She said it was kind. She said it helped. David finished noting her readings and looked at her and told her gently that the hospital did not allow visitors after 9 in the evening. He said that the visiting hours were strict and that the night ward did not have visitor access. She looked at him. She said that was strange because there were people who came to sit with her most nights. She described them: a woman who sat in the chair by the window, an older man who stood near the door sometimes, a younger man she did not recognize who sometimes sat on the end of the bed. She said they did not talk. They just sat. She said she found it comforting. David looked at the chair by the window. The chair by the window was empty. He asked her carefully when these visitors usually came. She said late, after the ward got quiet. She said usually between 2 and 4 in the morning. He asked her if she could describe them more. She described the woman by the window in detail: her age, her clothing, the way she sat, the specific quality of attention she gave. The description was specific enough and coherent enough that David found himself looking at the empty chair again, almost expecting to see her there. He noted it in the chart. Possible confusion or mild hallucination related to medication, a standard notation for something he had heard before, something that was common enough in oncology wards that it had a category. But he thought about it for the rest of that shift. The next night, at approximately 2:15 in the morning, David was passing Mrs. Okonkwo's room on his rounds when he stopped. He stopped because the room felt different. He cannot explain this better than that. He has tried. The room was the same room with the same equipment and the same readings on the same machines, and Mrs. Okonkwo was in the same bed in the same position she usually slept in. The window was the same. The chair by the window was the same. But something in the room was different in a way that he did not have a clinical term for. He went in. He moved through his standard checks. He adjusted her blanket. He looked at the chair by the window. Mrs. Okonkwo opened her eyes. She looked at the chair, and then she looked at David, and she smiled in a way that seemed to say she understood something that he did not yet understand. And she said that the woman was there tonight, wasn't she? David looked at the chair. He looked at it for a longer moment than a nurse looks at an empty chair during a routine check. He said that visiting hours were over. Mrs. Okonkwo nodded and said she knew. She said she did not think visiting hours applied to these ones. She said it without any distress, without any quality of fear or confusion. She said it the way she might have said something about the weather outside, as a simple observation about the state of things. David finished his checks and left the room. He stood in the corridor for a moment. He went to find his colleague, a nurse named Patricia, who had been working nights in oncology for 22 years. He found her at the nursing station, and he told her briefly what Mrs. Okonkwo had said, including the detail about the woman in the chair. Patricia listened. She did not look surprised. She asked David to describe Mrs. Okonkwo's general condition, and he did, and when he finished, Patricia was quiet for a moment, and then she said that in her experience, patients sometimes saw people in the time before the end. She said it matter-of-factly, the way she said most things. She said she did not know what it meant or who the people were, and she had stopped trying to know and had simply accepted it as something that happened, that it happened consistently, that it happened more in oncology than in other wards, and that patients who described it were almost always close to the end. David asked her how close. Patricia said usually within a week. Mrs. Okonkwo died 6 days later, on a quiet night, early in the morning, the way deaths happen in oncology wards when the illness has had long enough to do its work and the body has finally decided it is done. David was on shift. He was with her. She was not afraid. He has seen afraid at the end, and she was not it. She was calm in the specific way of someone who has been expecting something for a while and has made their peace with it arriving. She looked at the chair by the window in the moment before she died. David looked at the chair. He still cannot tell you with certainty what he saw or did not see in that moment, and he has chosen to be honest about this uncertainty rather than claim more than he can claim. He says, there was something. He says the quality of the space in and around the chair was different from the quality of the empty air in the rest of the room. But he cannot describe this in terms that satisfy him, cannot translate it from the language of his own perception into any language that other people can verify. He says Mrs. Okonkwo smiled. He says it was a real smile, not the smile of confusion or medication or the expressions that muscles sometimes make at the end when the brain is letting go of its controls. He says it was a smile of recognition, the specific kind of smile that appears on a person's face when they see someone they have been missing and did not expect to see. She died smiling. He has worked 16 years of night shifts in oncology. He has watched many people die. He has seen all the ways that people approach that threshold, with fear and with peace and with anger and with exhaustion, and sometimes with something he could not name, but that seemed in those last moments to be very much like the smile on Mrs. Okonkwo's face. He thinks about the chair by the window. He thinks about the woman she described, specific enough to almost be real, sitting there across the nights, keeping her company in the hours when the ward was quiet and the machines kept their steady count, and the darkness outside the window was the specific darkness of 3 in the morning. He does not know who the woman was. He thinks Mrs. Okonkwo knew. He thinks that is what matters. He is still working nights. He still moves through the oncology ward with his quiet, efficient warmth. Still asks about the things patients mentioned in passing. Still sits with them when they need someone to sit with them. He checks the chair by the window in room 4 every time he passes it on his rounds. He does not know what he expects to see. He knows that some things happen in the night ward that he does not have clinical terms for, and that the absence of clinical terms does not make them less real. He has made his peace with this the way that people make peace with things that cannot be resolved, which is not by resolving them, but by carrying them carefully, without forcing them into shapes they do not fit. The chair by the window is just a chair. He checks it anyway, every night, just in case. There is something else about David and Mrs. Okonkwo that he mentions when he has been talking long enough to get to the parts he does not usually include. He says that on the night she died, in the hours after, when the documentation was done and the family had been called, and the room was being prepared, and the ward was returning to its regular rhythm, he went back to room 4. He is not sure why. It was not part of his protocol. There was nothing clinical that required him to be in that room at that hour. He went because something pulled him there, the same pull that makes you return to a place where something important happened, even when the important thing is over and there is no practical reason to be there. He stood in the doorway. The room was dim, the overhead light off, just the small fixture above the bed left on. The bed was empty now, sheets changed, pillow centered, the room reset for whoever would come next. The monitoring equipment had been disconnected. The chair by the window was empty. He stood in the doorway and looked at the chair by the window for a long time. He does not make a claim about what he saw or felt in that moment. He is consistent about this. He says the room felt different from how rooms usually feel after a patient has died, which is a specific kind of empty, the empty of a space that has been vacated by a presence that was significant, the particular flatness of a room from which the life has recently departed. This room did not feel flat. It felt, he says, and he always pauses here, looking for the right word and not entirely finding it, like a room that people have just left, not like a room from which someone has died, like a room from which a group of people has departed after something. He searches for the word and uses gathering tentatively after a gathering of some kind. The energy of multiple presences having been there and now being elsewhere. He stood in the doorway for a while. Then he went back to his rounds. He has thought about the chair by the window many times in the years since. He thinks about the woman Mrs. Okonkwo described, the one who sat in the chair every night, and about the others she mentioned, and about the smile on her face in the last moment, the recognition in it. He thinks that if you spend 16 years in an oncology ward, you develop, whether you intend to or not, a relationship with the thing that the ward is about, with the process of dying and whatever that process is a threshold of, and that this relationship changes the way you see your work. He thinks his work is more than the clinical sum of it. He thinks the chair by the window is part of his work in a way he cannot put in a chart. He checks it every night, every single night. Just the chair, just to check. This story belongs to an orderly named Marcus. He is not a nurse and not a doctor. He is the person who moves through the hospital at night, doing the work that keeps the place functioning in the ways that nobody thinks about when they think about hospitals, the cleaning, the moving, the supply runs, the countless physical tasks that the building requires to keep operating through the hours when most of its staff has gone home. He has worked the night shift at the same hospital for 9 years. He knows the building the way that people who spend long nights in large buildings come to know them, not just the layout and the rooms and the corridors, but the personality of the place, the way different sections feel at different hours, The way the building sounds and smells at 3 in the morning compared to midnight, compared to the first light of morning. He knows which corridors are warm and which ones are always cold regardless of the season. He knows which elevator makes a sound on the 4th floor that it does not make anywhere else. He knows the rhythms of the building, its patterns, its routines. He knows when something is different. Something was different on the 3rd floor surgical recovery ward on a night in January. Marcus's route through the 3rd floor took him past the surgical recovery rooms in the middle of his shift, usually around 2 in the morning. Surgical recovery at 2 in the morning was quiet, even by night shift standards. Post-surgical patients were typically sedated or heavily medicated. The monitoring was automated. The nursing presence was present, but not intensive. It was one of the quieter sections of his route. He came through the double doors into the recovery section and began his work, the methodical movement through the corridor that 9 years had made automatic. He was about halfway through when he noticed the light in room 312. Room 312 was a single occupancy recovery room at the end of the corridor. It was occupied that night by a patient who had been through surgery earlier in the day, a middle-aged man named Gerald, who had been recovering normally according to the chart that Marcus had glanced at when he had passed the nursing station. The light in room 312 was on. Not the small monitoring light that stayed on all night. The overhead light. The full overhead fluorescent light, which was not supposed to be on at 2 in the morning in a post-surgical recovery room, which was unnecessarily bright and disruptive for a patient who needed rest. Marcus went to the room. He pushed the door open enough to look in. The bed was empty. Gerald was not in the bed. The bed was made, the sheets pulled tight, the pillow centered, the way a bed looks when a patient has been discharged and the linens have been changed and the room has been reset for the next occupant. Not the rumpled, warm look of a bed that has been recently vacated. Clean and set. Marcus looked at this for a moment. He checked the name on the room. Room 312. Gerald's name was on the board outside the room. He checked the chart slot on the door. Gerald's chart was there. He went to the nursing station and asked the nurse on duty about room 312. He asked if Gerald had been moved or discharged. The nurse looked up from her monitoring station and said that Gerald was in room 312 and was sleeping comfortably, and his last check was 40 minutes ago, and he was fine. Marcus said that room 312 was empty. The nurse looked at him. They walked together to room 312. Gerald was in the bed. The bed was in its normal post-surgical recovery state, the sheets slightly pulled, the pillow to one side, the ordinary comfortable disorder of a bed that has been slept in. Gerald was asleep, breathing slowly and steadily, his monitoring numbers displaying normally on the screen above the bed. The overhead light was off. The monitoring light was on. The nurse looked at the room and then at Marcus. Marcus looked at the room. He said nothing. He went back to his route. He thought about it for the rest of that shift. He is an orderly, not a nurse, which means his job does not require him to explain things medically or document things in charts. He is not required to produce a clinical framework for what he sees. He can simply see it and carry it. He carries it. He thought about what he had seen, which was an empty bed in a room whose occupant was, 30 seconds later, in the bed as if they had never left. He thought about the made-up quality of the empty bed, the pulled-tight sheets, the centered pillow, the way it looked like a room that had been reset rather than a room whose patient had stepped out. He thought about the light, the overhead light that had been on, and that was not on 30 seconds later. He has been working this building for 9 years. He knows the 3rd floor surgical recovery section in the specific way of someone who has been through it at 2 in the morning more times than he can count. He knows what it looks like when a room is occupied, and he knows what it looks like when it is not. He knows what he saw. He told one other person, a cleaning colleague who had been at the hospital for 12 years, a woman named Rosa, who listened to his account with the patience of someone who has been asked to receive strange information before and has developed the capacity for it. Rosa said that the third floor had a history. She said this without specifics, without names or dates, just that the third floor had a history the way that old buildings accumulated history, in layers, in the walls, in the particular quality of certain rooms at certain hours. She said she had her own experiences on the third floor that she kept to herself. He asked her what kind of experiences. She said seeing things in rooms that should have been empty. She said it the same way he might say seeing supply carts left in the wrong place. Matter of fact, a little tired, the tone of someone who has accepted something they did not ask for and are living with it practically. He asked her if it happened often. She said often enough that she no longer mentioned it. He has not mentioned it much either since that conversation. He does his route. He goes through the third floor. He passes room 312 at around 2 in the morning several nights a week, and he looks at the light under the door, and he notes whether it is the small monitoring light or the overhead light, and he has his hand on the door handle, and sometimes he stops, and sometimes he keeps going. He is not sure which is the right choice. He knows that whatever is in that room when the overhead light is on is not something he has a category for. He knows that knowing what you saw is different from knowing what it means. He keeps his route. He keeps his schedule. He does the work that the building requires at the hours that the building requires it. He checks room 312. He keeps checking. He does not know what he is watching for. He knows he will recognize it when he sees it. He always does. Rosa told him one more thing, later, on a different night, when they happened to be on break at the same time and the break room was empty, and the kind of quiet that produces honesty had settled around them. She said that the third floor was not the only floor. She said that in 12 years she had noticed things on every floor, in different forms, at different hours, with different qualities. But the third floor was consistent in a way the others were not. It was consistent the way a place that has held something for a long time is consistent, the way the memory of a thing shapes a space even after the thing itself is gone. He asked her what she thought was on the third floor. She was quiet for a moment. She poured more coffee. She looked at the table rather than at him. She said she thought that hospitals, because of what they were, because of what happened in them over years and decades, became places where the normal rules about what was present and what was not present became less reliable. She said she thought of it like a fabric that was thinner in certain places, worn down by use and time, and that in those thin places things came through that would not come through elsewhere. She said the third floor of this hospital was a thin place. She said room 312 specifically. He asked her if she knew why room 312 specifically. She said she did not know for certain. She said that in hospital buildings, old sections accumulated more than new sections, because the old sections had held more and for longer. She said room 312 was in the oldest part of the third floor, the part that had been there since the building was first constructed, the part that had been a hospital room for longer than any of the other rooms in the building. She said it had held a lot. He thought about the empty bed, the pulled tight sheets, the centered pillow, the overhead light. He thought about Gerald asleep in the bed 30 seconds after the bed was empty, asleep and breathing steadily and his numbers displaying normally, as if the empty room had been a brief interval between his presence and his continued presence. He thought about thin places. He thought about what comes through thin places and why. He has no answers. He is an orderly, not a philosopher, and he has never claimed to have answers to questions larger than the practical ones his job requires him to answer. He has the observation, and he has Rose's framing of it, and he has 9 years of cleaning the floors and moving the supplies and doing the work that the hospital requires in the hours when most of its staff has gone home. He does room 312 carefully. He is thorough in there, more thorough than he is in other rooms, more attentive. He does not know if this is a response to the room's reputation or to his own experience of the empty bed, but he does it. He thinks the room deserves the attention. He thinks some places do. He gives it. One last thing about Marcus and room 312. He has been there 9 years and he expects to be there for several more, and in those years the room has been occupied by many patients. Short stay and long stay, routine and serious, the full range of what surgical recovery holds. Each patient is different, and each occupancy of the room is different, and Marcus does not assign significance to the room for every patient who passes through it. But sometimes, on certain nights with certain patients, the light is wrong. Not wrong in the alarming way of that first night, not the full overhead light blazing in a room that should be dimmed. Wrong in a subtler way, the quality of the light slightly different from what the monitoring fixture should produce, a warmth to it that the cool white of the fixture does not usually have. He checks on those nights. He goes in. He looks at the patient. He does his work. The patients are always fine on those nights. He has noticed this. The nights when the light is slightly wrong in room 312 are never the nights when anything goes wrong with the patient. They are, if anything, the nights when the patients seem to sleep most peacefully, when their numbers are most stable, when the quality of their rest seems deepest. He has come to think of the wrong light as something other than wrong. He does not have a word for what he thinks it is. He does not need one. He checks the room. He notes what he sees. He moves on. That is his job, and he does it well. And room 312 is part of his route, and his route is the building, and the building has its own things, and he has made his peace with them. He keeps his route. He always will. This story belongs to a nurse named Sarah. She worked pediatrics for 8 years before transferring to a different ward, and she will tell you directly that the transfer was not unrelated to the things she experienced on the pediatric night shift. She does not say this with drama or with the self-consciousness of someone who is aware they are saying something that might make them sound unsteady. She says it plainly. She made the transfer because of what happened, and she is not ashamed of that, and she is still a good nurse who does good work, just not in pediatrics anymore. Pediatric wards at night are different from adult wards at night. The children are different patients, not worse or better, just different, in the specific way that illness in a child is different from illness in an adult, the way a child's body fights, and the way a child's mind processes being sick and being in a hospital. The particular combination of resilience and vulnerability that makes pediatric nursing both rewarding and devastating in measures that most other specialties do not reach. The ward Sarah worked had 18 beds. On a typical night shift, the ward would have 12 to 15 occupied beds, a mix of short-term cases and longer-term patients, children who would be home in a few days and children who had been there for months and whose parents had organized their entire lives around the hospital schedule. She knew all of them. She knew their names and their diagnoses and their favorite things and the specific fears each one had about their treatment and the way each one responded to her in the night when they woke. Which children wanted to talk and which wanted silence and which needed someone to just sit nearby until they could settle back to sleep. She knew a girl named Lily especially well. Lily was 7 years old. She had been on the ward for 4 months. She had a condition that Sarah will not name specifically out of respect for the family, but she will say that it was serious, that the team had done everything available to them, and that by the time Sarah had known Lily for 2 months, it was clear that the everything available was not going to be enough. Lily knew this. Children often do. Not in the clinical language, not in the way adults know things with frameworks and terminology, but in the direct and unmediated way that children know things, the knowing that comes before the words for it exist. She talked about it with Sarah sometimes, in the night, when the ward was quiet and the other children were sleeping, and the specific intimacy of 2 in the morning made it possible to say things that daylight made harder. She said she was not scared. Sarah asked her gently what she meant, and Lily said that she had met the people who were coming to take her, and they were nice. Sarah asked her when she had met them. Lily said at night. She said they came at night and sat with her, and she liked them. She described several of them, briefly, with the particular precision that children use for description, focused on specific details. One woman had red shoes, one man was very tall, one child had a missing front tooth, just like hers. Sarah noted it. She talked to the medical team. The response was the standard response, a gentle acknowledgement that children in Lily's situation sometimes experienced things like this, and that it was not uncommon, and it was not distressing to Lily, and therefore not an immediate clinical concern. On a night in April, Sarah came on shift at 11 and did her initial rounds, and Lily was awake. This was not unusual. Lily was often awake when Sarah arrived, waiting for her, wanting to talk or to have someone read to her, or sometimes just to have Sarah sit in the chair beside her bed and be present while she went back to sleep. Lily was sitting up in bed looking at the foot of her bed when Sarah came in. Sarah asked her what she was looking at. Lily said she was looking at the boy. Sarah looked at the foot of the bed. She looked carefully. She looked the way a nurse who has been doing this for 8 years and who has heard this before looks, which is not dismissively and not fearfully, but with a specific quality of attention that takes the child's experience seriously without projecting onto it. She saw nothing. She told Lily she could not see anyone. Lily said that was okay. She could not always see them either. Sometimes she could, and sometimes she could just feel them. And tonight, she could see the boy. She said he was nice. She said he had been there before. Sarah sat in the chair beside the bed. She asked Lily if the boy said anything. Lily said he mostly did not talk. She said sometimes he showed her things. Sarah asked what kinds of things, and Lily thought for a moment and said beautiful things. Colors and places that she had not seen before, but that felt familiar. The way places in dreams feel familiar, even when they are not places you have actually been. Sarah sat with Lily until she fell asleep. She sat for a moment after Lily's breathing had settled into sleep, and she looked at the foot of the bed. She does not make a claim about what she saw or did not see. She is consistent about this, has been consistent every time she has told this story. She looked at the foot of the bed, and something in the air there was different from the air in the rest of the room, and she does not have the language to describe this difference in any way that satisfies her, and she has decided not to try to force a language onto it. She sat with it for a moment. Then she got up and continued her rounds. Lily died 11 days later. She was peaceful. Her parents were with her. Sarah was not on shift that night, but she heard about it the next morning when she came in, and she sat in the break room for a few minutes before starting her shift and thought about the boy at the foot of the bed and the red shoes and the tall man and the missing front tooth. She transferred out of pediatrics 2 months later. She is a good nurse. She is doing good work. She has never regretted the transfer. She thinks about Lily sometimes. She thinks about what Lily said, that the people were nice, that she was not scared, that they showed her beautiful things. She thinks that is as much as she needs to know. It is enough. This story belongs to a doctor named James. He is a hospitalist, which means he manages the care of patients who are admitted to the hospital rather than being attached to a specific surgical or specialty practice. He covers the whole hospital, in a sense, moving between wards and departments as needed. The generalist in a building full of specialists. He has been doing this for 14 years, and the night shift component of his rotation, the weeks when he covers the hospital between 7 in the evening and 7 in the morning, has given him a relationship with the building at night that most doctors who work primarily day shifts do not have. He knows the hospital at night. He knows that it is a different place at night. Not dramatically different. The medicine is the same. The patients are the same patients. The equipment and the protocols are identical. But the atmosphere is different in a way that is difficult to quantify, and that he has spent 14 years observing without fully understanding. He thinks it has something to do with attention. In the day, the hospital is full of attention. The directed, purposeful attention of a functioning institution, people moving with intention, things happening on schedule, the building organized around a shared focus. At night, the attention thins out. The people are fewer, and their attention, however professional, is spread over a larger area. And in the spaces where attention is not actively directed, something else comes in. He is aware this sounds like the beginning of a supernatural claim. He wants to be clear that he is not making one. He is describing an observation about atmosphere, about the qualitative difference between spaces that are fully attended and spaces that are not. He is a doctor. He deals in evidence. He also deals in what he saw at the end of the hall on the 4th floor. The 4th floor of his hospital has a long corridor that connects the main nursing station to the older section of the building. It is a longer corridor than is strictly necessary, a product of the building's history of additions and renovations, and it has a quality at 3 in the morning that James has not been able to name, but has been aware of since his first night shifts there. He walks the corridor several times a night, making rounds, moving between patients, doing the work that his role requires. He has walked it hundreds of times. He knows it in the way you know a place you have passed through repeatedly in the dark, with a familiarity that is mostly automatic. On a Wednesday in October, he was walking the 4th floor corridor at 3:15 in the morning when he saw the man at the end of it, standing at the far end, just standing. The corridor was lit in the reduced nighttime mode, the overhead lights at lower output, so the far end of the corridor was partially in shadow, and the figure was at the edge of the shadow and the light in a way that made it difficult to resolve clearly. James stopped. He looked at the figure. The figure was tall, male, standing completely still, facing down the corridor in James's direction, not moving. The quality of the stillness was the first thing that James noted, before he had made any other assessment. It was the stillness of something that was not simply pausing or resting or thinking. It was the stillness of something that had been still for a long time and was accustomed to it. James has seen many patients at night. He has seen confused patients in corridors, post-surgical patients who should not have been ambulatory, family members who had fallen asleep in waiting areas and wandered. He has a professional response to unexpected figures in hospital corridors at 3 in the morning, which is to approach and assess. He approached. He walked toward the figure at the end of the corridor. The figure did not move. He was perhaps 30 feet away when the figure was no longer there. He did not see it go. He was looking directly at it, and then it was simply not there, between one step and the next, as if it had never been there, as if the shadow at the end of the corridor had rearranged itself while he was looking at it, and what he had thought was a figure was just the shadow. He stopped. He stood in the corridor for a moment. He walked to the end of the corridor. He checked the doors on either side, the utility room and the linen store and the emergency stairwell. He looked in each one. Empty. He went back to the nursing station on the 4th floor and mentioned to the nurse there that he had seen someone in the corridor. He described what he had seen in the precise clinical language he used for everything: height and position, and the stillness and the disappearance. The nurse listened and said that the fourth floor had a reputation. He asked, what kind of reputation? She said that night staff sometimes saw things in the old section. She said it was known. She said she personally had heard her name called in the corridor when she was alone there. Once, clearly, in a voice she did not recognize. James thanked her and went back to his rounds. He has walked that corridor hundreds of times since. He has been on night shifts in that hospital for 14 years, and the fourth floor corridor is part of his regular rotation, and he walks it as he has always walked it, with the attention that professional thoroughness requires. He looks at the end of the corridor when he enters it from the near end. He is looking for the figure. He has not seen it again. He does not know if this is because it is gone, or because he has not been in the right conditions to see it. Whatever the right conditions are, he thinks about the stillness, the particular quality of it, the sense of something accustomed to being still, accustomed to the dark, accustomed to the corridor in the reduced light at 3 a.m. He thinks it has been there a long time. He thinks it will be there for a long time still. He walks the corridor. He checks the end of it. He keeps his rounds. This story belongs to a nurse named Angela. 20 years, night shifts in the ICU for 20 years. If there is a category of person who has seen the most of what hospitals contain at their deepest and most serious level, it is the ICU night nurse with 20 years of experience, and Angela is that person. She has seen everything that the ICU offers. She has been present for the most critical moments of the most critical cases. She has worked alongside some of the most skilled doctors and some of the most dedicated colleagues she has ever encountered. In the specific crucible of the intensive care unit, where the work is always urgent and the stakes are always the highest available. She does not tell this story often. She is a private person and a professional one, and she is aware that what she is about to tell you does not fit comfortably inside the professional framework she has operated in for 20 years. She tells it because it happened, and because she has spent 20 years being honest about what she observes, and she is not going to stop now, because what she observed one night in the EQ does not have a clinical explanation. The EQ in her hospital has 12 beds arranged in a horseshoe around a central nursing station. All beds are visible from the station, which is the design purpose: constant visual monitoring of all patients simultaneously. The nurses at the station can see every bed. Every bed can see the nursing station. At 4 a.m. on a night in February, Angela was at the station doing charting when she heard her name. Not a shout, not a call for help. Her name spoken at a conversational volume from the direction of the beds. She looked up. All 12 patients were asleep. All 12 patients who were capable of sleeping, which on that particular night was 10 of them. The other 2 being sedated and ventilated and incapable of speech. The 10 who could have spoken were all, as far as she could see from the station, asleep. She stood up. She did a visual check, bed by bed, counting. All 12 beds, all 12 patients. She walked the horseshoe slowly, checking each bed, all sleeping. The sedated patients showing normal readings on their ventilators. She went back to the station. 12 minutes later, her name again. Same quality, same volume, same direction, from the beds. She looked up immediately this time, before the sound had finished. Nothing. All patients as before. She called to her colleague, a nurse named Tom, who was in the medication room off the station. She asked him to come out. He came out and she told him what she had heard, and he stood with her at the station and they both listened, and the ICU was quiet, in the way the ICU is quiet at 4 a.m. The machines and the ventilators and the monitors and nothing else. Tom said he believed her. He said it without the particular skepticism, that she might have expected from a colleague being asked to validate something like this, and when she pressed him on it, he said that the IQ had its own things, and he had been working it long enough to know that. She asked him what kind of things. He said names, sometimes. He said he had heard his own name in the EQ on 3 separate occasions over 7 years, always at night, always in the quiet hours, always from the direction of the beds. He said he had never identified a source, and he had stopped looking for one. She asked him what he thought it was. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he thought the IQ was a place where the boundary was very thin, and that things on the other side of the boundary were aware of the people who tended the people closest to the boundary, and that sometimes the awareness expressed itself. She has thought about this for the years since. She has thought about the word boundary, and what Tom meant by it, and what the other side might be, and who or what might be aware of her and her colleagues as they do their work in the EQ at 4 in the morning. She has heard her name twice more in 20 years of EQ nights. She no longer looks up when she hears it. She says quietly, under her breath, "I hear you," and she goes back to her work. This story belongs to a security guard named Robert. He is not medical staff. He is the person responsible for the security of the building at night, the access points, the parking structures, the entrances and exits, the corridors that connect everything. He has worked hospital security for 13 years at the same institution, and he knows the building in the way that security people know buildings they have spent long nights in, comprehensively and without illusion. He knows every door and every camera angle and every blind spot and every section of the building that is accessible at night and every section that is not. He knows the authorized personnel, and he knows the patterns of movement that are normal for each shift and each department and each time of night. He knows when someone is where they should not be. The woman he saw in the corridor outside the closed pediatric ward on a Tuesday in September should not have been there. Pediatric visiting hours ended at 8 in the evening. By 9, the ward was locked to outside access, the corridor leading to it accessible only to staff with the appropriate badge. Robert checked that corridor on his rounds, which took him past it at approximately 2 in the morning, the middle of his shift. The corridor was empty when he came through it on his earlier pass at midnight. Standard, as expected. At 2 in the morning, it was not empty. A woman was standing outside the pediatric ward doors. She was facing the doors, her back to Robert, as he came down the corridor. She was wearing ordinary clothing, not a hospital gown, not scrubs, not any hospital identification that he could see. She was simply standing there, facing the closed doors. He called out. He asked her if she needed assistance. She did not respond. He walked toward her. Standard approach, professional, calm, the practiced movement of 13 years of this. She was not there when he reached the doors. He did not see her move. He did not hear a door open. He was looking at her as he approached, and she was not there when he arrived at the place where she had been. He checked his surroundings immediately and completely. He checked the corridor in both directions. He checked the doors to the pediatric ward, which were locked and required badge access to open. He checked the stairwell door. He checked the utility corridor. Nothing. He went back to the security station and pulled up the camera feed for that corridor. He scrolled back to the time of his approach and watched it. The corridor was empty. For the entire period, the camera showed the empty corridor, the closed pediatric ward doors, Robert walking toward the doors and stopping in front of them and looking around. No woman, no one else in the corridor at any point. He has reviewed that footage more than once. He has reviewed it carefully, the way a security professional reviews footage for something they know they should have seen. The corridor is empty. He is alone in it. He saw a woman. The camera did not. He has been working hospital security for 13 years, and he has a protocol for everything, and there is no protocol for what the camera shows, and what a human observer sees being different things. There is no box on the incident report form for the camera is wrong, and so he filed the report in the language that was available to him, which was unusual individual observed in secure corridor, unable to identify or locate, and he went on with his shift. He thinks about her sometimes. The woman standing at the closed pediatric ward doors with her back to him. He thinks about who she might have been and why she was there and why the camera did not see her. He thinks she was visiting someone. He thinks maybe visiting hours do not apply to everyone. He keeps his rounds. He checks that corridor at 2 in the morning. Every night he is on shift. Sometimes the corridor is empty. He keeps checking anyway. This story belongs to a nurse named Patricia. She is the Patricia from story 2, the one who told David about oncology patients sometimes seeing visitors, the one with 22 years of night shifts behind her. She has her own story to tell, separate from the observations she shared with David. And she tells it now because David's telling of his story gave her permission for this one. She says that. She says she has been holding this story for a long time, and that hearing David tell his finally made it possible for her to tell her own. She says this without embarrassment, which is a quality she brings to everything, a complete freedom from the concern about how she appears that comes, she believes, from 22 years of watching people face the things that people face at the ends of their lives, and understanding at some fundamental level what actually matters and what does not. What she is about to tell you is not the strangest thing she has encountered in 22 years. She wants to say that first. She has encountered stranger things. But it is the one that affected her most profoundly, in the specific way of something that changes the shape of how you understand the work you are doing. She went to work on a Tuesday night in June and came home at 6 in the morning and sat in her kitchen for a long time before she could go to bed. The beginning of the shift was ordinary. She came on at 11, received the handover from the day shift nurse, did her initial rounds, established the state of the ward, identified the patients who would need the closest attention through the night. This was her routine, and she moved through it with the automatic efficiency of someone for whom the routine is as natural as breathing. She had 18 patients on the ward that night. She knew all of them by name and diagnosis and the specific details of their situations. 2 of them were in the final stages of their illness. One of these was a woman named Edith. Edith was 84. She had been on the ward for 6 weeks. She was a former concert pianist who had spent her life performing and teaching, and who still had, even in the diminishment of her illness, a quality of precision and intentionality in everything she did, the quality of someone who had spent decades training her attention. She was fully lucid. She was not afraid. She had made her arrangements and said her goodbyes, and she was waiting, with the patience of someone who has spent a lifetime waiting for the right moment, for this last thing. Patricia had talked to Edith many times in the 6 weeks, and she had come to think of her as one of the patients she would remember, the way that certain patients stay with you, not because their cases were unusual or dramatic, but because the person themselves was remarkable, and being in their presence had given you something. At 1:30 in the morning, Edith called Patricia to her bed. Patricia came immediately. She always came immediately. Edith took her hand. She said she wanted to tell her something. Patricia sat in the chair beside the bed and held Edith's hand, and Edith said that she had heard music the previous night. Not the hospital sounds, not the television from down the corridor, not any sound that the hospital could have produced. She said it was piano music, and she said it was very beautiful, and she said she recognized it, and she said she had not heard it for 40 years. Patricia asked her what she had recognized. Edith said it was a piece she had performed many times early in her career, a piece she had loved deeply, and played with everything she had. A piece that had not been part of her repertoire for decades, because her hands had changed, and the technical demands had become beyond what she could reliably produce. She said she had not thought about that piece in years. She said it came through the room last night, the whole piece, from beginning to end, perfectly played. The way she had played it when she was at her best, and she had lain in her hospital bed in the dark and listened to it all the way through. Patricia listened. Edith said she thought it was for her. She said she thought it was telling her something, and she thought she understood what it was telling her, and she was not afraid. She said she was ready, and she wanted Patricia to know that, and she wanted her to know that she had done a good job, that the care she had given had been real and had mattered, and that she was grateful. Patricia sat with Edith until she fell asleep, which did not take long. She sat for a moment after Edith was asleep and she heard nothing, just the ordinary sounds of the night ward, and she held Edith's hand for a moment longer, and then she got up and went back to the nursing station. Edith died at 4:27 in the morning, peacefully, in her sleep. Patricia was there. She went home at 6 in the morning and sat in her kitchen and thought about the piano music and the piece Edith had loved and played when she was young and at her best, and she thought about what it might mean that someone or something had played it for Edith on the last night of her life. She does not have a clinical category for this. She has 22 years of night shifts, and she does not have a clinical category for it. She has stopped looking for one. She thinks some things are not for clinical categories. She thinks some things are just true in the way that music is true, and that love is true, and that being present with someone in their last hours is true, the kind of true that exists in the experience of it, rather than in any documentation. She went to bed that morning and she slept, and she dreamed of music. She still dreams of it sometimes. She thinks that is right. This story belongs to an emergency room nurse named Kevin. The emergency room is different from the rest of the hospital at night. The rest of the hospital slows down. The ER does not slow down. The ER is the opposite of slow. It is the part of the building where the unexpected arrives, where the night delivers its accidents and emergencies and crises, where the work is least predictable and the hours between 2 and 5 in the morning can be as busy as any hour of the day. Kevin has worked ER nights for 10 years. He is a fast-moving, fast-thinking person, the kind who thrives in the environment, who finds the unpredictability stimulating rather than exhausting, who is at his best when the situation is changing and the response needs to change with it. He does not unsettle easily. The man who came into the ER on a night in November unsettled him. He was brought in by ambulance, which was ordinary. He was middle-aged, which was ordinary. He was alert and oriented, responsive and communicating, which under the circumstances of a late-night ambulance arrival was encouraging. The circumstances were that he had no vital signs when the paramedics reached him. The paramedics had responded to a call from an apartment building where a neighbor had found this man collapsed in the hallway. They had found him without pulse or respirations and had initiated CPR and had worked on him for several minutes in the hallway and had established a pulse and had transported him, and he was alive when he arrived at the ER, alert and communicating, his vitals stabilizing. This happens. People come back. Kevin has seen it many times in 10 years of ER work, and he knows that the brain can survive longer without oxygen than is commonly understood, and that people who have been without cardiac output can and do recover and return to full consciousness. It is not common, but it is not impossible. What was unusual was what the man said when he arrived. He was oriented to time and place and person. He knew who he was and where he was and what had happened to him as far as he was aware. And while Kevin and his colleagues were working on him, he was talking, calmly and conversationally, in the way of someone who is processing something and needs to say it out loud. He said he had been somewhere. He said he was aware that this was a strange thing to say in an emergency room, but he wanted to say it while it was clear, while he could still access it, because he had been told it was important to remember, and he was trying to remember. Kevin asked him where he had been. He said somewhere quiet. He said it was very calm, and that he had felt completely fine there, better than he had felt in years, and that there were people there he recognized. He said his wife had been there. He had lost his wife the previous year. He said she had seemed happy and had told him he needed to go back. Kevin noted this in the way that ER nurses note things, quickly and professionally, while continuing to monitor and work. The man said there was something else. He said he had been told something while he was there and he was supposed to pass it on. And he looked at Kevin directly and said a sentence that Kevin has never shared publicly and will not share now. A sentence that was specific and personal and addressed to Kevin. Something that no stranger could have known. Something about Kevin's own life and his own situation. Accurate in its details. Something that he had told no one, and that had no route from Kevin's private experience to this stranger's knowledge. He said it, and Kevin stopped what he was doing for a moment. Just a moment. Then he went back to his work. The man recovered. He was transferred to the medical ward for observation, and he was discharged 3 days later in good health. Kevin asked after him during those 3 days and received normal reports, stable and improving. He never spoke to him again. He has thought many times about going back, about asking how the man knew what he knew, about having the conversation that would either explain it or make it more inexplicable. He has not gone back. He thinks some things are better carried than examined. He thinks the man told him what he told him because it was true and because someone wanted him to know it. He thinks about it when the ER is quiet, when it is 3 a.m. and there is a brief lull and the department is running at its normal low hum instead of the higher register of active emergency. He thinks about what was said. He thinks it is right. He keeps working. The ER keeps receiving what the night delivers. He is there to meet it. This is the last story, and it is different from the others. The others have been individual accounts, specific experiences belonging to specific people who can be named or described, events that happened on particular nights, in particular rooms that can be located on the floor plans of real hospitals. This last story is a pattern. It was compiled by a nurse named Marguerite, who has worked night shifts in 5 different hospitals over the course of a 30-year career that is now ending. She is retiring at the end of this year, and who has been, over the course of those 30 years, quietly collecting something. She collected accounts from colleagues, from friends who were colleagues, from nurses and doctors and orderlies and security guards and cleaning staff who were willing to tell her what they had experienced on night shifts in hospitals, what had happened to them in the quiet hours that they had not been able to explain and had not reported officially and had been carrying around ever since. She has over 200 accounts. She is not a researcher, and she is not publishing a study. She collected the accounts because she is curious and because she is careful, and because 30 years of night shifts had given her her own experiences, and she wanted to know if the pattern she saw in those experiences was particular to her or whether it was broader. It is broader. The pattern is this. In hospitals, in the hours between 2 and 5 in the morning, a specific set of experiences occurs with enough regularity across enough different hospitals in enough different locations and reported by enough different people with no connection to each other that they constitute a pattern rather than a coincidence. The first is what Marguerite calls the seeing. Patients who are close to the end report visitors. They report these visitors consistently across cultures and religions and personal histories with a consistency of description that is remarkable. The visitors are people the patient has known who have already died. They sit quietly. They do not speak much. They are comforting rather than frightening. This happens so consistently and has been documented so thoroughly in palliative care research that it has a clinical term, nearing death awareness, and there is serious medical literature on it. Marguerite's collection of accounts simply confirms what the literature says, from the perspective of the people who are present in those rooms. The second is what she calls the carrying. Staff members, nurses and doctors and others who have worked night shifts in hospitals for extended periods report with notable frequency that they have experienced something that she describes as the weight of the place. Not a physical weight. The accumulated weight of the experiences the building has held, the suffering and the dying and the fighting and the surviving, somehow present in the atmosphere of the building at 3 a.m. in a way that it is not present in the daytime. People describe feeling watched, or feeling accompanied, or hearing their names, or seeing figures, always at night, always in the quiet hours, always in the specific conditions of the hospital, at its least busy and most bare. The third is what she calls the knowing. Patients who have been revived after periods without cardiac function, people who have come very close to the line and been brought back, sometimes report specific information that they could not have obtained through normal means. Not always, not even frequently, in the grand scheme, but often enough, across enough accounts, from enough different sources, that it appears in her collection with enough regularity to be part of the pattern. She has 214 accounts. She has spent 30 years collecting them. She is retiring at the end of this year. She does not know what she will do with the collection. She did not collect it with a plan for what to do with it. She collected it because she is a careful person, and the careful thing to do when you observe a pattern is to document it. She has documented it. She thinks about what it means. She thinks, 30 years into a career spent in hospitals at night, that the hospitals are exactly what they appear to be on the surface. Buildings full of medical equipment and trained staff, and the continuous business of keeping people alive. She also thinks they are something else, something that the surface does not fully describe, something that has to do with what happens at the edges of lives and what those edges are edges of. She does not have a clinical term for this second thing. She has 214 accounts. She thinks that is enough documentation for now. She is going to retire and sit in her garden and let someone else do the night shifts. She has earned the garden. She is going to plant things. She is going to let the garden be quiet in the daytime way, the simple, uncomplicated quiet of a place where nothing is at the edge of anything. She is going to rest. This last story belongs to a nurse named Claire, who worked the night shift in a medium-sized hospital in the American Midwest for 11 years. She is a practical woman, trained and experienced, and not given to imagination. She tells this story carefully and without embellishment, because she does not need to embellish it. It is enough on its own. Claire had worked the night shift for so long that daytime felt wrong to her. Not in a dramatic way, just in the quiet way of a body that has reorganized itself around a different schedule, that has learned to sleep when the sun is up and to be alert when it is down, that has its sharpest hours between midnight and 4 a.m. when the rest of the world is somewhere else. She had friends who worked days, who could not understand why she chose nights, who talked about nights as something to endure rather than something to prefer. And she could never quite explain to them what she actually preferred about them. The quiet, partly. The night ward had a different quality than the day ward. Less traffic, fewer visitors, fewer of the administrative pressures that filled the daylight hours with a specific kind of busyness. At night, the work was more direct. The patients, the care, the monitoring, the immediate and unglamorous business of keeping people alive through the hours when the body is most vulnerable and most likely to make its decisions about which way it is going to go. She knew her patients the way night nurses know their patients, which is differently from the way day nurses know them. She knew them in the quiet, in the unguarded hours, in the times when the performance of being a patient that people put on for visitors and daytime staff had been set aside, and what remained was just the person, just the body doing what it was doing, and the machine readings and the breathing. She knew when something was changing before the machines said so. This is a skill that experienced night nurses develop and that they cannot fully explain because it is not based on any single observable indicator. It is based on the accumulation of thousands of hours of listening, of watching, of being present in rooms with people who are ill in the specific way that makes the air around them different, and developing an awareness of when that air changes. The air in room 7 changed on a Tuesday in March. The patient in room 7 was an elderly man named Mr. Callahan. He had been on the ward for 11 days, admitted for complications following a procedure, the kind of case that was not dramatic in any particular way. Not the acute emergency cases that came through. The ER, just a slow and steady decline that the team had been managing with the careful attention that such cases require. He was 81 years old. He had been a school teacher for 40 years. His wife had died the previous spring, and his daughter drove 2 hours every weekend to sit with him and hold his hand and talk to him about her children, his grandchildren, who were growing up faster than either of them wanted. Claire knew all of this the way you know things about people you spend long hours with in the quiet. He had told her about the teaching, about the schools he had worked in, and the students he remembered decades later, on the nights when he was alert enough and restless enough to want to talk. She had listened the way good night nurses listen, with the specific quality of attention that comes from having nothing else competing for it. On the Tuesday in March, she came on shift at 11 and did her initial rounds, and when she came to room 7, she stood in the doorway for a moment before going in. Something was different, not in any reading, not in any observable indicator. He was breathing. The machines were showing what they had been showing. The room was the same room it had been when she left at 7 that morning, but the air had changed in the way she had learned to recognize, the specific change that she had learned over 11 years to pay attention to. She went in. She checked everything. She adjusted his pillow. He was asleep, breathing slowly, his face relaxed in the way of very old people in deep sleep, all the ordinary tension of wakefulness gone. She stood and watched him for a moment, and then she went back to the nurse's station. She noted in the chart that she would monitor him closely. At 2:47 in the morning, Mr. Callahan died. It was a quiet death, the kind that happens without event. The machines showing the change, and then the flat line. And Claire was there quickly, and the doctor was called, and the process that happens when a patient dies on a night shift began and proceeded in the way it was supposed to proceed. The time of death was noted as 2:47 in the morning. At 3:15, the call button from room 7 went off. Claire heard it at the nurse's station. The call button system in that ward had a display panel that showed which room was calling, and room 7 lit up clearly. The number visible on the panel, the soft chime that accompanied the visual indicator sounding twice the way it always sounded. She looked at the panel for a moment. She stood up and walked to room 7. The room was exactly as it had been 20 minutes earlier when she had last been in it. After the body had been attended to, and the initial documentation had been completed. The bed was occupied, the sheet arranged in the specific way that the recently deceased are arranged before the next steps are taken. The machines were off. The room was dim, just the small light above the bed that was always left on at night. The call button was on the bed rail beside the patient's right hand. It was the standard design, a simple button on a cord that connected to the wall, that patients pressed when they needed assistance. It was exactly where it always was. She checked the connection, secure. She checked the button itself, no malfunction. She went back to the nurse's station and noted the incident and told herself it was an electrical glitch, a loose connection, the call system doing something mechanical and explainable. At 3:40, room 7 called again. She walked back, same thing, everything in order, the call button exactly where it was. No one in the room who could have pressed it. She checked the system connection again, more carefully this time. Everything was exactly as it should be. She mentioned it to the other nurse on shift. That night, a woman named Dorota, who had been working nights for 15 years and who listened to Claire's account with the specific expression of someone who has heard things like this before and has made their peace with them. Dorota said that sometimes patients did this. She said it in a matter-of-fact way, without drama, the way you say something that you have observed enough times to consider settled. She said that sometimes, in the time right after, they reached back. She said she did not know how to explain it, and had stopped trying to explain it, and had simply accepted it as something that happened. Claire was not satisfied with this answer. She was a practical person, and she wanted a practical explanation. She spent the rest of her shift monitoring the call system and checking for electrical faults and looking for the rational cause. She did not find one. Room 7 called twice more before dawn, once at 4:20 and once at 5:51. Each time she went in, each time the room was empty in the way that rooms are empty when the person who had been in them has gone completely. When the specific presence that a living person creates in a space has departed and left just the room, just the furniture, just the air. She sat at the nurse's station in the early morning light and wrote up her incident report and tried to write it in the language of electrical malfunction because that was the language available to her. She knows that was not what it was. She has worked 11 years of night shifts, and she knows the difference between a malfunction call button and a call button that is being pressed by something she does not have a category for. She does not have a different category available. She has only the one she has, the rational one, the medical one, the one that says there is an explanation for everything, and the explanation is always mechanical or electrical or human. She filed the report. She went home. She slept through the day the way she always slept, with the curtains drawn and the house quiet. The sleep of someone whose body has learned to rest in the daylight. She dreamed about room 7, not a frightening dream. She dreams about it, sometimes still, years later, and in the dream, the room is just a room, and the call button is just a call button, and Mr. Callahan is sitting up in the bed, looking at her with the expression he used to have when he was about to tell her something about a student he remembered. Some specific student from 40 years ago, whose name and face had stayed with him. In the dream, he never finishes what he is about to say. She wakes up before he gets to it. She has wondered, in the years since, what he would have said. She thinks maybe he just wanted to say goodbye. She thinks that is probably enough. She thinks about room 7 every time she starts a night shift. She thinks about the call button and the 4 times it went off, and the empty room, and Dorota's matter-of-fact explanation, and the dream where he never gets to finish his sentence. She has been a night nurse for 11 years. She has learned that the night has its own rules, and that those rules are not always the same as the day rules, and that doing this work well means being willing to sit with the things that do not fit the daytime categories without forcing them into shapes they do not fit. She sits with it. She does her job. The call button in room 7 has not gone off again since that night. She checks every shift when she does her rounds. She is not sure if she is relieved or sorry. She thinks it might be both. Fenfelflings. 10 stories. 10 nights. One hospital after another. Different buildings in different cities. Different staff and different patients. The same hours and the same quiet. And the same things happening in the quiet that do not fit the daytime categories. The hospitals keep running. The night shifts keep turning over. The people who do this work keep doing it, carrying what they carry, seeing what they see, noting what cannot be officially noted, and filing it in the private accounts of their own experience. They take care of people. They take care of people at the edges of things. They deserve, those people, more than we usually give them. Sleep now. You are not in a hospital. You are not at any edge. You are in the safe middle of your own ordinary life, in the dark that contains nothing unusual, in a night that is just a night. The hospitals are doing their work without you tonight. Let them. Close your eyes. Sleep well.